Hello there. Welcome to a brand new series of Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. I'm Diane Holt.
And I'm Will Leach. Hello, it's lovely to be back with you for a third series.
So thanks to the Community Relations Council for supporting us and to Commission Christian Radio for the use of this lovely studio.
Well, Diane and I make these podcasts to bring you real stories from real people, ordinary people of faith who've made a mark by being inspired by that faith to take action in a host of different ways. And every time we think there's little else to learn, Diane, someone else comes along and teaches us something new, even when they didn't really mean to.
Yes, it's been remarkable, and I think it's good to remember those moments. So you've compiled a lovely wee selection.
I have indeed. Have a listen.
We're not really talking enough, I feel, about peace and reconciliation 2+ decades on from the Belfast Agreement. So it was just a sense of how can we have those conversations with people who are pushing on with peace.
My challenge is that we have not done it. It's not over. Churches have given it back to politicians to sort out, and politicians are not the right people to sort out our woundedness. They're the ones who every single 4 years are fighting on our woundedness to get votes. We need to take up that mantle again.
I just did what I saw to do. If you see something to do, then do it. Why did I do it? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And somehow I translated that into, I'd better be talking to my enemies all the time.
One of the things that goes in the midst of conflict, particularly when people are hurting and atrocities are happening, is complexity. Everything is simplified. And yet in every conflict in our world, it's complex. It's not as simple as it looks. There are decades, if not centuries, of communal dynamics that have given rise to where we're at.
You have to listen more than you speak. You have to learn to not show up at every fight you're invited to. There are battles to fight and there are battles to walk away from. Jesus is in Gethsemane and the guards come to arrest him. And Peter takes the sword and lops the guard's ear off. And Jesus says, put away your sword. But in my imagination, Jesus is also giving us a message which is non-violence, but also if you cut someone's ears off, they can't hear you.
I try and not define someone else's motivation for doing something, but I might disagree with the outworking, of their motives. I suppose what I like to think I can do is show them that there's actually a better way than resorting to violence or intimidation.
Peacemaking's not a place for shrinking violence. There was a certain thrawn, stubborn so-and-so in me that just kept going and going across the community no matter what anybody said. That was not necessarily the nicest part of me, but I needed that thrawn, stubborn so-and-so.
Isn't that lovely?
Oh, it's really good to look back and remember just some of the remarkable people we met in Series 2 of Inspired to Act.
So let's meet some more at the start of Series 3.
Yes. Our guest this time is priest and peacemaker, campaigner, festival director and much, much more. Hello to Father Martin Magill of the parish of St John the Evangelist on the Falls Road in Belfast.
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you very much, Will.
Oh, it's
lovely
great
to be here.
You.
Martin, tell us a wee bit about your parish, about St John's, that part of West Belfast.
Yeah, so maybe I'll locate it first of all. So for those maybe not so familiar with West Belfast, and of course I'm very keen to encourage people to come and get to know West Belfast. So we're actually St John's Church and the parish. Well, the church is really just opposite the city cemetery. which a lot of people will know. We're on up a little bit further from the Royal, heading out of Belfast. I suppose one of the things that I love about St John's is the fact that I can walk to every part of the parish. My previous parish, I was in Ballyclare, which stretched for miles and miles and miles, whereas St John's is very compact. Maybe go as far as Milltown Cemetery on the one hand, and then further down, not as far as the Royal on the other, and then also taking in, heading towards what are referred to locally as the Balls on the Falls. So small enough, very compact, and also I should mention parts of the White Rock Road as well.
No, and you're right beside a primary school, aren't you?
That's the wonderful St Kevin's, and also right beside a preschool playgroup. And when I'm mentioning some of the education, I'll also need to mention St Maria Goretti Nursery School as well.
How many people do you look after, Martin, when you talk about the size of the parish being compact? It's a very compact part of Belfast, so it's a lot of people.
Oh, it is. Well, I suppose in terms of for those who come regularly, we're probably talking maybe somewhere around about 250 to 300 people who come regularly in the course of the weekend to us. But then we would then see other people as well. More often than not, it's sad times, so the time of a funeral, so there'd be a lot more contact than that.
What would you say your biggest challenges are?
So I suppose parish-wise, there's the whole question of how do we share the gospel, how do we proclaim the gospel nowadays? So that whole sense of maybe in the past with so many people coming regularly to Mass, that's no longer the case. So the whole sense of, for me, the question of making disciples is a really, really key piece. It's the whole question of evangelisation, sharing the gospel. That would probably be one of my primary concerns. And as well as that also, I'm a great believer in all-member ministry. How do we encourage people to actually be involved and have a real sense of belonging within the parish? That will be a really key piece as well. And then I suppose, how do we support people in their faith journey? But also, how do we support people whenever they find life really difficult? And at times, obviously, there's people in the parish at this moment who are finding life very challenging.
Is that a cultural challenge, all-member ministry? Because in Ireland, we tend to think there's clergy people and there's the rest of us. We might volunteer to stack chairs and open up, but ministry, I don't think so.
Yeah, so, and I suppose one of the lovely things is actually, so not when you mention Ireland there, but right throughout the Catholic Church, right throughout the world, really, I suppose in many ways, I go back to the time of Pope Francis. He would have really been encouraging a greater sense of people coming together. Word that's not really into, it hasn't embedded into vocabulary at the moment, is this word synod. He would have brought people together in synods, bishops, people from all over the world, and really trying to encourage, and not really as a sense of working together, it's a new way of being church. And really more than anything else is actually trying to hear all the different voices and really trying to encourage people to say, well, actually, parish, we've all got a responsibility of that. Trying to move beyond helping Father to a sense of, it's my parish and I can be involved in this and I have a part to play.
It's absolutely the same in the Protestant context, because I think many people who are sitting in the pews look to the minister or to the priest as they're the one that does the work. Is it a really big challenge to have that mindset shift to say, actually, this is, we're a priesthood of all believers in some ways. We're trying to enable you to be very much a part of the worship of this place.
I would have to say so. Yes, it is actually, and in many ways, it really is beginning to see things in a different way. So it is about seeing things in different ways, beginning to sort of take a look and think, okay, maybe in the past, this is how I would have grown up, but this is the way I would have been brought up. And to some extent for people, maybe older people as well, thinking, I now need to see this in a new way. And I suppose, again, to go back to Pope Francis, I think that was one of the great gifts that he was encouraging people to see. In some ways, a change of mind, but also a change of heart as well.
Well, what about your own faith, Martin? How did, what was it like growing up? Where did you grow up? And when did you sort of find that faith for yourself?
I grew up very close to the international airport. I suppose I'd still, on times I'll talk about going out to Aldergrove. So I might even still say Aldergrove Airport if that could slip through. Small farm out there. My family's still out there. I spent my day off going out there. So I grew up there. Farming community, and I suppose in some ways my neighbours were all sorts of different denominations and still are, which is what I love so much about the area. Faith important to my parents, particularly my mum, who would have made an effort to go to Mass every day. our home was very close to a small church in the area, St James's, Aldergrove, and I would have gone there each weekend with my parents. That would have been on a Sunday in those days. I don't think we had Vigil Mass when I was starting off on the Saturday evening, and then became an altar server, got involved in the parish in different ways. So I think my early background would have been part of the influence on me.
What about that sense of calling? Where did that come from?
I suppose as a child, I think probably looking at the local priest, and at that time when we had many priests in Down O'Connor, which is the diocese, the local priest was a man called Father Colum Campbell. His influence as a priest, I think, really got me thinking about the idea of vocation. And then I went to post-primary school in North Belfast as a Malachis, and again seeing a number of priests, some really inspirational priests there, and I think that probably helped me develop the idea of a possible vocation. I really fought against it, but eventually I had to give in.
There's hardly a person who sits in that chair who hasn't fought against their calling.
We're both thinking, so many have said, here I am doing it anyway.
Yeah.
So mine would be a sense of, here I am, send somebody else.
You mentioned St Malachy's on the Antrim Road there, and any journalist, and I'm another one, will think automatically Troubles and Murder Mile, because that would have been a difficult place to go to school when you were a young lad and then a teenager.
I suppose one of the things, and I was thinking about this recently, is I can't believe my mother, who would have been risk averse, and I am going to name the year, 1973. 1972 was the worst year for deaths in our Troubles here. And here she is sending it was her boys. My younger brother went there as well, and then my sister went to school in West Belfast. I can't still believe my mum at that time
sent you down the hill.
Sending us there. Really unbelievable. But it was really difficult. A phrase that I would have got later on, which is that so many of us normalised the abnormal. It was really strange. Going to school at the time, as did others as well, not just simply in St Malachy's, but in other schools as well. I think I would have heard the writer Tony Macaulay saying something similar for him going to BRA, which is quite close by on the Cliftonville Road. That whole sense of not going with school uniform, there was a dispensation, so we didn't have to go in the green, white and black school colours of St Malachy's at the time. Didn't wear school badge. It was one of those ones that we'd sort of put on afterwards as well, with those little buttons that you could actually just clip on. And that's so that we could go to school anonymously. And then obviously just at times having to go out of school at various times. I mean, having to leave school early because, for example, there was the death of one of the hunger strikers, Frank Stagg, riots at that stage, and my mum having to go in, negotiate barricades and bring my brother and I, along with our neighbours, home early that day. UWC strike, Ulster Workers' Council strike, again, living through that. And in fact, there were stages we didn't go to school at all. During those times, such was the uncertainty. And then, as you mentioned, Murder Mile as well. And I suppose I've served in a number of different parishes in North Belfast, and I suppose just aware of the legacy of that, actually. Yeah, North Belfast suffered hugely during our Troubles.
Do you remember the fear?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, very much, actually. Different times, I suppose, getting in the morning time. And sometimes there would have been stones thrown at the bus. And then going out in the evening time, bomb scares, wondering, was there going to be a bus? What do we do? And again, just maybe some of the encounters as well. Standing at the bus stop, there used to be an army supply shop just on Clifton Street. It's now gone with the development of Westlink, and there was a Jewish couple there actually looked after it. She had one section of the shop and he had the other. The Abrams, she was particularly good actually, so she was very, so if she saw anything, she'd come out to look after her St Malachy's boys, as
come on,
she
you
talked
in,
about.
Yeah,
and brought us into the shop to make sure that we wouldn't have. So yeah, fear. Oh, very much so.
Martin, that can't not have shaped you. How do you think it has shaped who you are now?
I have had the chance over the years to think about that, and I'm quite convinced now, if you were to ask me what has me involved in the role of peacemaking, I am going back to my experience. First of all, growing up where I grew up, farmers are very pragmatic, relationships are very good. That was a really lovely start. But there's also a sense of the troubles and the experience of the troubles and all that we experienced and all the fear. And so I am quite convinced that part of the reason why I am prepared to continue to do what I do, why I will continue to speak out, is because I do not want any teenager having to go to school in the way that some of us during the Troubles went to school. Kids played a huge part in. For me, one of the things that I love seeing when I'm in the centre of this city is to see children, the teenagers in their school uniforms, walking casually by without a worry in the world. That means so much, and that still encourages me to this day. But that experience of going to school at those times and then university as well, it played a huge part on me.
I think it's really important as well, Martin, that people hear what it was like, because I think, especially, younger people now, it's we don't often hear just how difficult it was, just how bad it was. And I think as well, for other people who don't have that experience, it's really important for people to hear such an experience as you had, because I grew up in Bangor. Yes, I remember the workers' strike, funny enough, because our cars were stopped by masked men, and my mother was disgusted because she couldn't get me to school and stuff, but nothing compared to what you experienced there. So I think it's really important to hear other people's stories to enable people to understand just what we have now compared to what it was like then.
Very much so. But I suppose the other thing that I would say, actually, so I was able to get home to Aldergrove. Now, we would have had some incidents over the years in my home place, the local pub, our local church, and then Crumlin a number of times would have been attacked and a number of premises blown up. But I would also be very much aware, for example, that other parts of the city, and Will touched on North Belfast, for example, they suffered enormously. But even as a child or as a teenager going through that. And I suppose one of the things that I'm very keen on is actually that those people who feel as if they've missed something out about the Troubles and almost want to get involved in armed gangs have really no idea what it was like. It was absolutely horrendous. And I suppose, as I say, part of what I do at the minute is so that we do not go back to where we came from before.
We're going to pick you up then as the young man who went off to university, and you went to Queen's in the first instance?
Yes, I was at Queen's from 1980 to 1984.
Studying what?
Started with Francais. Haven't been practising too much of it from that. English and scholastic philosophy. And then my degree was in English and scholastic philosophy.
But that wasn't it, because then more study. Was the sense of calling very strong at that time?
Living in the seminary, it was called St. Joseph's, or what we the students called the Wing. It was just part of St. Malachy's College. So I left St. Malachy's in 1980 in June, and then in October I came back into the Wing, another part of St. Malachy's on the same campus, to begin my studies for priesthood on the 1st of October 1980.
So that was more than a bit of a walk up to Queen's?
It was quite a walk, actually, which we did every day, and found it good exercise. So it's about half an hour, 35 minutes. I must say it's not something that bothered me too much at the time, although obviously again aware of some of the unrest in the city. There would have been a bit of a challenge going through some of that.
We share a memory of Queen's in those times, and it's an unhappy one, which was the murder of Edgar Graham.
Yes.
In December 1983.
Yes.
And we were both in buildings in class that were more or less opposite it.
Yeah.
And we both, I can remember the sound of the gunshots. You must remember that day.
I do. That was the 7th of December 1983 as well. The lectors at the time was one of the priests of the diocese. He was the professor of scholastic philosophy, Father James, or Father Jimmy as we called him, Father Jimmy McAvoy. And I actually think in some ways I can almost remember what he was talking about at the time, which gives some sense of what I think he was actually talking about, even the importance of laughter at times. And then the next thing, these shots rang out. And I think we all instantly realised, oh, that's very close. And certainly after the lecture was over, because I think he certainly finished the lecture, going by, and then at that stage realising that someone had been murdered. And I think probably even at a distance, actually, still seeing Edgar's body covered with a blanket.
I have a memory, there were 5 of us in class with a teacher, and I have a memory of the 2 other lads. There were 3 lads. and they had their arms around each other. We were all sort of supporting each other. It was very traumatic. And I remember one of them saying, something like this would make you want to join the RUC. And the other said, you see, where I grew up, I've seen lots like this, and it's made me wonder about joining the other lot.
Okay.
And it made me start to think everybody's coming from a different perspective. And at 18, I'd never thought that before. You know, it was the first time I had to encounter the reality of what happens around us. And that it's nuanced and complicated depending where you're starting from.
So I want to go back to the phrase I used earlier, which is we normalise the abnormal. So this is a university lecturer, yes, a budding politician as well. I think was Edgar on his way to the library or coming from the library, something like that. Really going about his own business for the most part, and the next thing, his life is ended in such a brutal way. That's not normal.
No.
We're going to look more at these issues, but you next went and studied in Rome. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so each year the bishop chose a student just to make sure that they kept on the legacy of the Irish College. So I was asked or appointed to go to Rome. My studies began in September because we had to go out for a month before class began to learn Italian. So that was September, let me get this right, 1984. A month there in Rome in the Irish College learning Italian. Encouraged to go sightseeing, and then studies began with lectures in Italian at the start of October, and then I had 4 years in Rome, 3 years doing the bachelor's in theology, and then to do a master's, and I chose the area of unity of Christians, or this are referred to as ecumenism. I explained that because I once said ecumenism, and somebody thought I was saying economics and said, why was I studying economics in Rome? But it's actually the ecumenism. And so the experience, 4 years in Rome, I talk about when I came back in 88 after my ordination. I was Rome sick for a year until I got used back to Belfast.
Oh,
again.
you really enjoyed it?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
But do all priests study in Rome?
No, very, very few, actually.
So why Rome?
Yeah. So the Irish College and going back to the legacy of the Irish College, which goes back, what is it, let me think, is it the 16th century? So there's a whole sense of keeping that going, and so that we have the Irish College is still in Rome as well, though there are actually no Irish seminarians there at the moment.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know.
But no, most of the students would go to study in St Patrick's College, Maynooth.
So, on which parish were you first unleashed?
Well, I was expecting to do that, but for the fact that Bishop Cathal Daly, who was the bishop at the time, around my ordination, which was in July 88, said, I'd like you to go and do a training course, a PGCE, Postgraduate Certificate in Education, to train as a teacher. So I went to St Mary's University College on the Falls Road to study teacher training for a year. And then after that, I was expecting to be appointed to a school, but instead Bishop Cahill asked me to come into his office to work with him in the office. Because we had a surplus of priests, would have had, yes, so changing times. This is 88, 89, we had a surplus of priests, so we were able to send them into colleges, but instead, as I say, he asked, and I ended up working in his office, which was a fascinating experience for about a year and a half, before he was then moved to become Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland, and then I was then moved at the same time as him to the local parish to help out on a temporary basis, which turned out to be 7.5 years.
Now, by this time, as you said, you were Rome sick for a year,
yes.
But you were back in Ireland all those years after the traumatic things we've been talking about, yes, during your school years and when you were in your first degree at university, at Queen's University in Belfast. And yet you clearly from the beginning said, I'm going to be a person who speaks out and says what I don't think is acceptable in our society. Did that grow? Did you come home with that? Where did that come from?
I think in some ways I'm sometimes described as a campaigner, so I think I'm just a natural campaigner. When I see something that I don't think is right, I feel a sense of that I have to do something about that. And I suppose, really throughout my priesthood, different issues will come to my attention. I suppose I have a really strong sense of social justice, and then will feel the need to say something about that.
And recently you've been really highlighting coercive control of paramilitaries in communities. Martin, how did that start, and how did you start getting engaged in that?
I think because at a stage I was appointed to a parish in West Belfast, Nativity Polglass, which introduced me to this whole area of car crime, which I really knew absolutely nothing about. I don't like the phrase of joyriding. I avoid that. It really is car crime. And just aware, for example, the damage that it had been doing to communities. So that was part of the issue. But then within that, we would have had young people who were taken out and brutalised, either shot or beaten a number of different times. And I got to know some of those young people. I'm still in contact with some of those young people from the time. And just seeing, I've such a clear memory of a conversation that I had. This young it was in the passenger seat, and he had this sort of like metal cage. I'd never seen one of these before actually on him, and when I asked what happened, he then told me that he'd been taken out and had been either shot or beaten, can't remember the finer details, but then had been quite badly brutalised. So I suppose that whole sense of when I heard the stories of some of those young people, and not for 1 minute did I agree at all with what they were actually doing, any of the criminality or any of the antisocial behaviour, didn't agree with that. But I certainly did not agree the way in which some people took that sort of what I would consider as an abuse of human rights to do that.
Summary justice, no, or they became the judge and jury.
Absolutely.
And yet, Martin, it's interesting because when I was working at the Link, we had very much a number of young people who experienced exactly the same issues. And I remember standing in the queue at a supermarket, and literally, because there'd been a headline in the local Chronicle in Newtownards about this young boy who was only 13 who'd been beaten with baseball bats with nails in, and yet the woman in front of me was, and we knew this young man. Yeah. And the woman in front of me was literally saying, but what can you do? Yep. And it's the tacit almost agreement of the rest of the community, or the use of the paramilitaries as the police force of certain communities, that is extremely difficult. So you're not just trying to speak out against them, you're trying to change the mindset of a community that feels that it hasn't really got any control at all, and that they're not being supported well enough by government services or the police or whatever. So what is it that you've actually been engaged in doing in that area?
So part of it is campaigning. So if there's an opportunity in mainstream media, we take that up. There's a lobby group called Stop Attacks. We've been going now for a number of years. Youth workers, clergy, former member of one of the Coromila staff, who's now also been ordained as a clergy person. So there's a small number of us, there maybe about 8 or 9 of us, and again through social media we try to highlight the issue. So if we go back to, for example, the 13-year-old child,
absolutely,
child until considered an adult at the age of 18, we would call that child abuse, in terms of look at any definition.
Changing the language.
Change the language. And I would really have to say I pay particular tribute to our Justice Minister, Naomi Long, who's been one of the first politicians to come out and to call out that language. I notice other politicians are also coming and using that language as well. And one of the things that really has encouraged us is that there has been a considerable decrease in the number of under 18s who have either been beaten up or shot. Because at the end of the day, it's child abuse. And I suppose this is seeing the damage it's actually done. And again, I mentioned earlier that I'm still in contact with people to this day. There's still the trauma that they still are carrying years and years on from the time in which they had been brutalised in the first place. So it's that whole sense of, we spend a lot of money on our police service, rightly so. We need to support our police service, and we then have our judiciary, and then that's the way to go when there are issues. And yes, there's no doubt about it. If, for example, that there are issues that are affecting local communities, well, we have to find ways to be able to support those local communities, that they don't have to put up with antisocial behaviour or regular break-ins or whatever the issue might be.
There's a very obvious question here, which is, I think a lot of people listening will be against the things you're against. It is a completely different step to speak out publicly and to speak truth to power and to say to the judiciary or to the police or to communities or to Stormont politicians or anybody else, I don't agree with what you are allowing to happen or not working hard enough to stop or whatever. You're raising your head above the parapet, and to most of us that takes courage. Do you think of it that way?
Yeah, I suppose, again, my faith is very important to me, and to be able to rely on that faith, to be able to find the courage to do that. But again, just to say, the whole question of social justice is really important to me. I suppose, again, the example of Jesus, that sense of speaking out wherever the case may be, the role model. And again, for those listeners who are Christian, again, I would say, well, when we actually look to the example of Jesus, here was someone who didn't hide away, but who was prepared to speak out. And I suppose part of it also will touch in this whole area of suffering, which I do need to bring in, because inevitably, as trying to follow Jesus, as trying to live the Christian way, inevitably there'll be an element of taking up the cross, and I suppose that's part of the speaking out as well. It will require that.
I've deliberately led you into speaking out because I'm going to take you back to a time you remember very well, which is April 2019. And there was a riot in the Cregan in Derry, Londonderry on Fanet Drive. I was on duty in the BBC newsroom that night. I'd been on the phone with a freelance colleague, Leanna O'Neill. She was there filming some of what was going on her phone. And then 12 shots rang out, and the young journalist Lyra McKee, standing observing that riot, was struck in the head, and she died shortly afterwards. Lyra was only 29. Most of us knew her, I knew her. And I spent the next night in that area keeping an eye on things, explaining it to a local news audience, to a UK national news audience. And I don't think I could have felt lower. I think a lot of us did. Lyra's funeral was in St Anne's Cathedral a few days later. Martin, you spoke at it, and it's still remembered 6 years ago as we record this. Let's remind everyone of what you said, because there was a remarkable moment where everyone in that cathedral started to applaud at what you'd said and got to their feet, and it went on and on and on. And then we saw Colm Eastwood, Arlene Foster, Michelle O'Neill, Mary Lou MacDonald, Leo Varadkar, all read the room, as it were, and rise to their feet. The British Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, was there. So was the Irish President, Michael D. Higgins. Listen to this clip of what you said and what happened next.
Since Thursday night, we have seen the coming together of so many people in various places and the unifying of the community against violence. I commend our political leaders for standing together in Cregan on Good Friday. I am, however, left with a question. Why, in God's name, does it take the death of a 29-year-old woman with her whole life in front of her the death of a 29-year-old woman with her whole life in front of her to get to this point?
So, Martin, did you expect that response?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I had put into my address, I had acknowledged the courage of some of the local women who had actually put their hands into red paint and had put these painted hands on some of the walls associated with an organisation that was involved in the shooting at the time, and they had a real sense of courage. I also encouraged people to bring any information to the police, so I thought I might have got a reaction to that. I certainly did not expect to get a reaction to the question, why does it take the death of a 29-year-old woman to have our politicians standing together? I did not expect the reaction that I got.
Were you nervous actually speaking? I remember you saying, because I think we were involved with a leadership support programme at the time, and I asked you, did you talk to anybody in advance? Because sometimes it's hard to know what it is you should really do at things like that, which were going to be so public.
Oh, it was on national TV.
Exactly.
Live.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
So I didn't realise when I was first asked by a member of Lyra's family, would I be willing to be involved in the funeral? And I think that was possibly on Good Friday, because I suppose I would remember it in terms of Lyra was killed on Holy Thursday evening. That's when the riot took place. So I think I was asked on Good Friday. Didn't realise at the time it was going to be such a big funeral and such a prominent and significant funeral. And as it became clear that this is really something quite spectacular, I then did ask people. One of them was the Reverend Harold Good. And I'd said to Harold, and in fact it was Harold suggested that. I said, I'd be asking, why does it take that the death of a 29-year-old?
So had you meant to put pressure on the politicians, or was it really Harold saying this would be a really good opportunity to really publicly challenge them?
So it really was inspired by Harold. I also talked to Steve Stockman as well, Reverend Steve Stockman, my friend. I would have talked to him through it as well. But it really was from Harold, that whole sense of, he was thinking, if I were in an opportunity, if I had this opportunity, this is the sort of direction that I would be taking. I suppose in a sense, and you were asking me earlier about my interest in speaking out against some of the abuse, some of the paramilitary style attacks. So as I say, my particular focus would have been on that and supporting the police and really trying to bring an end to these sorts of attacks. And so I wouldn't have been expecting the reaction I got.
Do you not think you were actually vocalising what the public in the main were thinking?
That became very clear afterwards, actually, in some ways, that as people started to stand up. So in some ways it really caught the moment. There's no doubt about that, actually, a real sense of frustration with our politicians, and it really left the politicians in a very difficult position. One of the things that I will share with you, which is not publicly known, is later on that day I had a phone call from Arlene Foster, who made a point of connecting with me that evening, and in a sense of, now I don't regularly talk to Arlene, but I still would have contact with Arlene from time to time, which I really was very impressed with. Now, also to be fair to him, Colm Eastwood came to visit me a few days later and introduced me to Micheál Martin, who certainly wasn't in government at that time. They actually came to visit me in the parish house. And the memory that I have from that meeting is I offered them tea or coffee, as I normally do. Mrs. Doyle, a.k.a. my housekeeper, wasn't around that day. And one of the things that really struck me was Micheál Martin said to me, "Would you like a hand to make the tea?" And I said, I really would. And I have to say, from that, I have been left with such a soft spot for Micheál Martin, actually, in the sense of, fair play to you. There you are. As I say, he wasn't in government at the time, but he's able to come into a parish kitchen and give a hand to make the tea.
Do you know, Martin, it's so good to hear some of the human moments of people like Arlene Foster calling you those visits, because honestly, people dehumanise politicians in a way which often isn't very helpful. And actually, I think we need to help people to understand these people are human beings, especially in this era where social media can destroy people so easily. So it is really important. And what was also going through my mind when you were talking about that, it seems to me that was a God moment. Yes, it was, you were prompted, but it was a God moment because something happened in St Anne's that nobody really was expecting. There was something happening that is not is something that we can't always explain. And I think those things are so powerful because everybody remembers that moment still, and it's just lovely to hear a bit about the background behind it. So.
And I suppose when I mentioned Arlene, I had a situation, and sometimes it happens as well, and you sort of touched on it in the whole sense of, having the courage to speak up. So I also spoke up on a parish situation, again, my strong sense of social justice. And the piece that I really was making is it's not fair to leave parish life to one or two volunteers. So we have an elderly group of volunteers, but people sort of expect things to go on. So that whole sense of, hold on everybody, can we all be involved in this? And I also used it in terms of the financial side of things as well. And the piece was then picked up and it went viral, and the amount of abuse that I got in social media at the time. And one of the people that I actually spoke to as I was sort of trying to weather the storm was Arlene Foster. and I found Arlene's advice, which I still follow to this day, and I actually shared with someone recently who's found himself in a bit of a storm. I still share some of Arlene's advice to me from the conversation that I had with her when I phoned her.
Oh, that's lovely.
Thinking back very quickly to Lyra, looking back 6.5 years since then, have we learned anything from Lyra's life and her death and that moment as a society?
We have a very fragile peace. Riots can easily sort of develop and get out of control and can have dreadful consequences, as that particular one did for Lyra's family, for the McKee family. I don't know if we've got to a point where we really appreciate the fragility of the peace that we have. And I take a look at the wider world and the state in which our wider world is. I feel there's a sense in which we've more learning to do. And part of that is to say, how do we avoid making sure we don't go back? Again, I suppose that sense of, living through the troubles. I don't want anybody to go back through that again, which is why I'm committed. But I think we need more people to put the hand to the wheel to make sure that we work away at our peace process, as the building of relationships, the getting to know one another, to getting to know the city of Belfast. I mean, as I'm based here, right throughout the city, not keeping to our own corners.
But it is all about relationship, Martin, and I think that's really at the heart of it. And
being intentional.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's not just relationships with people just like me. It's being intentional to build relationships with people who aren't just like me. And I think you really do, manifest that. And what is it that drives you towards that? Is it that trying to widen people's understanding of, one particular side or the other? Let's not, that's how people perceive it. That's not what we want, of course. But what is it that drives you in that area?
I suppose in a sense, and this is a sort of quite a reflective interview, which I'm loving. Again, I'm back to my childhood. You're asking about growing up and where I grew up. I remember another of my neighbours, because my home parish was fabulous in the 60s, 70s, 80s in producing vocations to the priesthood. And one of my neighbours ended up as a Redemptorist priest, but he was on the missions and came to visit the family. And I remember asking him, so have you any hobbies? And his answer still stays to me to this day, which is, I love people. And I suppose in a sense, actually, that's probably part of my answer as well. So you will talk about relationships. So yeah, the relationships. I suppose I'm going to throw in a little bit of Latin here. You have a very well-established and educated audience here. But I'll translate it, which is cor ad cor loquitur. Heart speaks to heart. So that whole sense of whenever we hear the other person's stories and where they're coming from, it really does transform something. So yes, the power of relationships, but there's also a real value in how we listen to others, trying to take away the filters and trying to really understand. And I suppose that would be really important to me. But I would also pick up this word intentional. That's a really key piece as well. So we really need to be intentional about the peacemaking end of things. If we are very laissez-faire, I better throw in a little bit of French than I did at least a year of French there somewhere. That's not good enough. So we need to be intentional because, as I say, it doesn't take very much to bring us back.
But you see, your example has intrigued me, because I know in the past you've said that when you have time on a Sunday evening, you will frequently go and worship somewhere completely different to your own background, tradition, experience, somewhere you don't know, or somewhere you've heard about, or somewhere you want to try. And I've run into you here and there of a Sunday evening worshipping in a Protestant church and thought, that's interesting, there's Father Martin out learning and connecting and making relationships. So that's the intentionality of that. And I think maybe that's what you and Steve Stockman do with the Four Corners Festival. I know it's meant to be Four Corners of Belfast. Is that part of that intentional connecting, being apart, putting people together, intentionally making a difference?
Oh yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, this is about relationships, and one of the things that we'll sometimes say at the end of one of our events is to encourage people to take out the phone, to exchange numbers, to actually go and meet somebody that they've maybe just met for the first time there. That for us is the real sense of this is really making a difference. And I suppose that's one of the lovely things, is that just over the years that, Four Corners has been a catalyst for getting people to meet new people, to get to know one another, to build those relationships. But there is an intentionality about it. Yes, there's also a sense of addressing the legacy of our past. So I talked about growing up in North Belfast. East Belfast, I didn't know at all for so many years until Four Corners. And I was joking with you, it's no longer an issue for me coming here to commission radio here in Ballyoran Lane. That would have been a complete mystery pre-Four Corners, but not anymore. And I'm completely comfortable in whatever part of the city I'm in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of other people have travelled to places where they've never been as well, and they've found a real welcome there. Do you have any stories of different changes and impact that you've seen because of the Four Corners Festival that you'd be liking to share?
I have. I certainly, for example, been aware of one of the venues that I was in for an event. I'll keep it fairly vague. And someone said to me, it was a Catholic venue, a number of years ago, I was outside protesting about the building of this particular place. And here he was at an event. Yeah. Someone else, again, would have been out protesting at a Four Corners event. Now, there's been quite a journey and is now contributing to Four Corners. So, yes.
You haven't, mind you, been afraid when you felt you've needed to speak about the church and the wider church, but also the Catholic Church when you're not happy with something you see. And again, as a parish priest, not easy.
Well, I suppose that whole sense of we have to name things. And I'm going to go back to a conversation I had in a previous parish I mentioned was in Polglass, but I was also in Lenadon. And this whole question of we had within the Catholic Church, it seemed to be every year or two with yet another report, with the Ferns report, looking at the whole question of child abuse and all the scandals around that. And this was after one of these reports, or it might have been the letter of Pope Benedict to the Irish Church at the time, trying to address the issue. And I remember saying to a woman called Sally, who was the chair of our safeguarding committee there, I said to her, here is another dark day for the church. And her answer was powerful. She said, oh, no, it's not. Light is being shone into the darkness. That is good. So that whole sense of we have to speak out when we see that. So that whole sense of actually, when it comes to the question of the scandals, the abuse, how the whole thing's been handled, etc., we can't hide away from that, and we have to acknowledge it. We have to say this was wrong. And I suppose there's also a sense of, for me, in terms of where we are for a legacy, I wonder when it actually comes to looking at the past, would it really help? I happen to believe it would. That if there could be an honesty, if there could be, I might call it a confession, confession is good for the soul, to be able to sort of say, we did this and we were wrong, or this was wrong. Now, I'm aware that's a huge challenge for some people. And again, maybe, for example, for us as church to sort of look at some of the things. Were there times with some of our preaching, did we say things, or was it a question of we didn't speak out or we didn't pray? So, for example, there might have been a murder in a parish community, in an area, and then come Sunday service, come Sunday worship, come Sunday Mass, not a reference whatsoever made to it, etc. So that whole sense of when we get it wrong, I think we really need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, no, I know that's really helpful as well. And I think, Martin, there's something that I learned when I was out with the Inspired Individuals programme with leaders who work in peace and reconciliation in Africa. And it was something called standing in the gap, because the person who has done harm to you may not be able to be there to say sorry, or may not want to be there to say sorry. But someone from that community who is recognised as someone from that community, being that person to stand in the gap and say this was wrong, is actually hugely powerful and hugely important for whoever's been harmed. So I think at times maybe you have been that person, and maybe there's others in your community have been that person. I mean, I think what we need it for our time as well. The big question for me in terms of this podcast is, what is it that inspires you to act, and what advice would you give to somebody to really engage in some way and take some small steps towards making a difference in their community?
So my faith would certainly be a key part of that as well. I've talked about my earlier experience of growing up in Aldergrove, going to school in North Belfast. That certainly is definitely a catalyst, because I do not want us to go back. That's what still inspires me, but certainly my faith. But alongside that as well, there would be a definite sense of an invitation to trust, to be involved in this. And I'm going to give an example. As a parish, we had our first ever Alpha course, and when we were planning it last year, we were wondering, do we do it, do we not do it? And somebody sort of says, I don't think you're going to get people to do it. And so there's a sense of thinking, oh my goodness, can we actually do it or not? But we went ahead with it, and 24 people had actually signed up for it. And I think we ended up with about 18 or 19 did the whole course. We're going to run it again in autumn time. But with Alpha, one of the real lessons for me, a real message, real word from the Holy Spirit, which is trust, Martin, trust. So for people of faith, it has to be a sense of trust, that if we believe the Holy Spirit is guiding us, then we have to trust. And I'm maybe just going to finish with something I was actually preaching about recently, which is sometimes we can be so overwhelmed by all the different choices that we make. Maybe it's a prayer of saying, God, Holy Spirit, guide me to do the next right thing. Guide me to do the next right thing.
Thank you.
Martin, thank you so much for joining us, going down that big long memory lane and being as reflective and being as honest. It's been fascinating. And yet again, Diane, you and I have learned stuff.
We have indeed. Well, I hope people out there have too.
So thank you very much, Martin. Thank you for listening. If you have a thought or a comment about Inspired to Act, you can send us a text from your podcast app. We'd love to hear from you.
And do please check out our work at thriveIreland.org, and we've got a new, beautiful, all refreshed website, so you really have to have a look even if you've seen it before. And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook as well, and there's a YouTube channel.
We'll be back every month or so for Series 3, so we'll see you again very soon. But for now, bye-bye.
Bye.